Okay, welcome to the .com Revenue Working Group. Today is June 10th, and today we have a fun-filled agenda talking about some actual results on some experiments that we've ran. So Jeremy, you've actually got the first agenda item. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we ran a ReCAPTCHA experiment. We have not had the chance to actually analyze the data though. So I will open up the board, share my screen, and chat through where we're at on some of these initiatives. Should be able to see my screen now. So starting in the far right, we have ready for testing ReCAPTCHA as harming activation rates in GitLab.com. Current status of this is we ran today an experiment via a pre-post experiment by turning off ReCAPTCHA for 2 hours on GitLab.com. So thanks to Alex and Dave Smith for making that happen. That was very, very helpful. The result of this is I'll be working with Eli and Ash to analyze the results of kind of what we learned from that. But what we hope to learn is to understand what impact ReCAPTCHA is having on our registration on GitLab.com, and then to provide some estimated outcomes for the impact on revenue. So like I mentioned, I'll work with Eli and Ash on analyzing the impact. And I also wanted to point to the in development column here, specifically this use Flipper as a short-term A/B testing solution. So Ash has been working on a A/B testing framework using Flipper with a merge request out in 12.0. And this will allow us to do a more proper experiment on the ReCAPTCHA sign-up flow using Flipper. So what we hope to do is analyze the results from the experiment we ran today, and then when Flipper, our A/B testing framework, is merged in, then conduct a longer experiment on ReCAPTCHA after we get sign-off from the infrastructure and abuse team to then be able to measure the revenue impact in the A/B test. So that is what we're pushing towards, and we hope to have that test enabled likely by sometime next week. But that's also dependent on some other issues that we'll talk about in this meeting. So, Christy, do you want to voice over your comment whenever you have a chance?
Yeah, since we did just a turn off, I'm just wondering what your plan is for how you want to analyze that data. Like, are we looking at like a series of previous Mondays during that same window, or what do you have in mind?
That's correct. So the testing isn't perfect here because of the fact that we do not have the ability right now to measure the number of viewers who are looking at that page. So it'll simply be a comparison based off of previous Mondays during this same time period in terms of what kind of lift we see in registration. So that lift that we see on a percentage basis will influence the number of users that we'll see on GitLab.com, which will influence top of funnel. So the second experiment that we want to run, we have a merge request pending that will allow us to actually measure the number of viewers on that particular tab, which will compare and actually get like a discernible conversion rate, which we can compare also to revenue later on. So we'll have our analysis will improve when we run this next week. But this will at least give us the ability to estimate the number of the estimated outcome based off of what we see from this early test. But more than anything, like we have no idea what the impact of ReCAPTCHA is on our registration funnel. So I don't know if I'm going to see 1% increase or a 30% lift. But that's obviously going to really tell us a lot about our prioritization here and how urgent this is that we find a solution. Yeah. Because even if we manage to conduct the experiment, we have the results that are highly supportive of this, and like it's a big revenue lift, we still won't be able to simply turn ReCAPTCHA off for GitLab.com for all time. We will need to be able to come up with some type of alternative to how we handle spam and abuse control. So that will help us prioritize it in a big way. It's going to be a big revenue positive change for .com.
Jeremy, I can voice over my question. You had mentioned, obviously, we're going to have the data that shows us the impact of disabling the ReCAPTCHA security feature. But then you also mentioned analyzing the revenue impact based on those results. How are we going to do that?
It's a great question. So, like I mentioned, we have dependency on the Snowplow migration work, which we've been working on in parallel. And as we've said before, the lack of identifiable information in our shared infrastructure makes it impossible for us to analyze revenue. So, in parallel with our A/B testing framework, we need to migrate our infrastructure over to in-house so we can capture that information. Because once we begin doing that, then we can tie the participants in the A/B test back to specific users, and we can understand how those users move throughout the funnel and eventually convert into paying customers. So based off of that information, we can understand what the revenue impact of the experiment is going to be, but not before. So it's dependent on those two work streams, which is the better A/B test framework, which has merge requests, and also the Snowplow migration work, which is also underway. So that is kind of captured in my questions in item 3, which is, can we get an update on the Snowplow migration work and also the data snapshot? So I will ask that of Dave Smith. Dave, do you mind giving us a status update on the Snowplow migration work over in-house?
Yeah, sure.
That would be great.
Yeah, so for Snowplow, we did a limited test last week and shifted all GitLabcom traffic to our Snowplow infrastructure, validated that it was going to be able to take the load, found some problems, and then have been working through that, through some changes with Cameron and Taylor on that. Those problems seem mostly resolved. There's one or two things they were last working through for some of the stuff his team needed, and we were hoping to actually switch it on again to send all .com traffic this week for the plan in perpetuity, and then just to continue to refine any problems that we find from there. So we have a production issue. I'll go ahead and find the link to that and just post it here in the doc. For once Taylor and Cameron agree things look good, we're looking for a reason not to turn it on at the moment, but we were thinking maybe Wednesday.
That's great.
Jeremy, the Snowplow work gives us raw data as to what the actual sales numbers would be that we can then correlate back to this 2-hour window. But at the same time, there's a lot of other variables. How do we take out that at that point in time a large deal came through or some other thing that impacted sales or revenue positively, but not necessarily as a result of our test?
Yeah, so in the 2-hour window, we can't. So that's why I'm proposing when we get the Flipper A/B testing framework in, we actually do a 50-50 split where we can actually tie back to specific user activity. And you're right, that'll be a challenge that we have to undergo in the analyses, where we will have to filter out those types of outliers. When we've discussed looking at revenue lift in the past, we've talked about only looking at organic growth, where the user finds their way to a paid plan and they upgrade of their own accord. That'll be a challenge we'll have to take on in the analysis portion of it, but I'm confident that we'll be able to do that. Cool.
Jeremy, sorry, one more question. So the hypothesis obviously is more users will sign up. What is the rationale when we disable ReCAPTCHA though that those users will actually convert more? Are we simply just increasing the number of people getting through the top of the funnel, or is there something about users that would essentially sign up for GitLab without the ReCAPTCHA versus not signing up for GitLab if they were faced with the ReCAPTCHA that we would expect conversion rates to actually be different than?
Nope. It's entirely what you mentioned, which is just we're increasing top of funnel.
Okay.
Cool. So Taylor, I had a couple of questions related to that. So as part of the Snowplow migration work, so it sounds like Wednesday-ish, we might be able to have a serious volume of data going through our own infrastructure from GitLabcom production. So 2 questions. One, do we automatically get the personally identifiable information, or is there some anonymization that's currently taking place via Snowplow that we need to kind of turn off? The crux of my question is, do we get the personally identifiable information we need to be able to measure things like revenue or user activity between sessions as part of that, or is that a separate work stream that we need to kind of consider?
Apologies for video off. My internet's been super flaky. So I think, so one of the things we did, right, was for the GitLab group, we started sending over more data. And I think switching to the GitLab hosted infrastructure would kind of, you just get all of that information. I think the big question, I was going to circle up with Eli on this, is like, okay, we have the event data coming in. You can send, whatever data over we want. What do we, like, it's not 100% clear to me what data we need in each event to uniquely identify each user. So we'll have information about, like, what URL they're on, where they're coming from, all the, like, browser IP, all that fun stuff. Do we need names, like the namespace they're part of, user ID? That's kind of where my question is. And if that's the case, then we might need to add some stuff.
Cool. That's really helpful. I will open up an issue on this, and we can review that together. Eli, I'll work with, we'll work together on this and make sure that what we anticipate coming through in our data warehouse is enough for us to do the analysis. But we can review that together and validate. Cool. And then Taylor, the other question was, is there an update that we can that your team can share on the updating of the GitLab.com data snapshot? I know this is something that Taylor has been working on. I'm sorry, Thomas has been working on. Is there any update there in terms of getting that updated so we have an updated .com snapshot to look at?
Yeah, I need to circle with Thomas. As far as I know, he started the backfill and the sync this weekend. There's some pretty large tables, and we're a little bit rate limited just because it's a read replica. I don't know the full status, but that job has been started. There's just some large tables in there, so it may take a little bit.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear the job has started. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Taylor, does that include not only GitLab.com, but also customers and licensing and the other databases that we have?
Yeah, I mean, Thomas is working on all that. I think the priority has been GitLab.com, but everything he's written and kind of worked on will pull all of that in. Honestly, he'll be better able to speak to the timing of that, but yes, that's all kind of included. He's just started on GitLab.com first.
Yeah, that's the right priority. I'm not questioning that. I just wanted to make sure that we at least were talking about customers in the same breath, though, because what we found out in the GitLab.com metrics meeting is the amount of things we would want to kind of cross-reference between those two databases is rather significant in terms of free to paid analysis and which users are going from free to paid. So it's important. That's why I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a separate issue that was weeks behind. As long as it's in the same issue and being tracked appropriately, that's fine.
Yeah, no, they're all linked together, and since they're kind of smaller databases, I think once you get to GitLab.com, you get everything else pretty quick.
Okay, so Jeremy, thanks for the update on all of that. Any questions on anything Jeremy went over, agenda item 2 or 3 so far? Okay. Why don't we dive into the growth update for 12.1? Actually, I'm going to kind of circumvent that. How about the growth update for 12.0? Because there was the onboarding issue that was supposed to be released in 12.0 that we could also run some A/B testing around. So before we dive to 12.1, can we talk about that real quick?
Yeah, certainly. So there were a couple of things that the growth team worked on in 12.0. The major ones that we've already reviewed in this group related to finding an A/B testing framework that worked for us. Like I mentioned before, Flipper is the short-term solution that we have that we kind of have. And we have in 12.1 some time to try to find out a longer-term goal or a longer-term solution that we want to invest in. In terms of the onboarding experiment, we have onboarding that is still in progress at the moment. It's a very complicated new feature, but it will ship in 12.0 behind the feature flag. And my hope is for us to be able to use that Flipper testing framework to be able to A/B test that. So I need to circle back with Martin Warchak, the engineer, to talk specifically about a rollout plan and the timeline. So I'm happy to provide an update kind of in the next meeting on that. But for right now, the ReCAPTCHA experiment seems to be the nearest term kind of experiment for us to run. So I think as long as we get these data questions answered and updated by sometime next week, we should be able to run with that. But we're certainly doing the onboarding in parallel.
What's the rollout plan of the onboarding improvements? Obviously, I think we should just turn that on. I don't think we need an A/B test to kind of test the efficacy of it. But do we have at least a plan in place to be able to compare data, prior to and after we roll that out, and do that in a way that makes sense?
Well, I mean, if we simply turn it on, we won't benefit, since the data improvements that we're planning and that we just talked about that are coming next week would most likely, we won't have much pre-data to be able to compare it to, I think is what I'm trying to say. So okay. I think it is worth considering. I'm happy to provide like a more specific rollout plan and timeline next week once I kind of understand exactly when like this is going to be able to be in a 12.0 RC. But my concern is I don't know if I'll have pre-data to be able to compare it to fully understand it.
Okay, so then it would make sense to do an A/B test on this being launched so we can understand how valuable it is.
I think so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's just drop that as an action to review this next week.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Bartek, does that make sense to you, by the way?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, nothing else to add from me.
Cool.
Okay, did you want to dive into 12.1, Jeremy?
So the only thing I wanted to mention there is that growth is also focused on improving the self-managed data. So the growth team is working on some, and I'm just pulling up the specific issue that I'm referring to. One other thing is that we're also trying to improve not only on .com, the amount of data that we get out of self-managed. So one thing the growth team is going to be working on and focused on in 12.1 is improving our usage ping right now by adding a time period and also SMAO metrics to it, so that the growth team can also start iterating on and improving activity on self-managed. I know that the focus of this working group is specifically on .com, but I just wanted to call out that we haven't forgotten about self-managed. We're trying to improve usage ping so that it's a mechanism that we can use for experimentation and improving self-managed as well. So just something to call out.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. So we're at the end of the meeting. I think we've effectively touched on reviewing the exit criteria already, just by nature of talking about the other experiments in flight. We do have a few extra minutes. Anything else to discuss or any other questions that have surfaced?
I just want to say, Eric, I'll continue to drive this. Next week, what I'll hope to have is we'll hope to hopefully have some Snowplow switched over and seeing some more robust data coming through there. And we'll hopefully be able to be in a position we'll be able to either have run the A/B test using Flipper or have run it, or hopefully be in the process of it. And using that information, be able to dissolve this working group by virtue of looking at the revenue results that come out of that. So okay. That's the goal.
Broader question to the team. We pushed this meeting back 2 days to, wait for some of these updates to come through. We've got a meeting on the books for this Thursday. It sounds like we'll at least have the analysis of the data from the 2-hour experiment we did today on Thursday. So does it make sense to keep that meeting and just have a short meeting and review the results there? And then kind of next week you go through the broader rollout plan for Flipper as well as the onboarding rollout? Does that make sense to everyone? What do you think?
Personally, I'm happy to share the results asynchronously, and I'm sure we have a Slack channel for this working group there. I think next week we'll probably have some more substantive action items that have already an analysis done. So unless you disagree, I would say skip actually the meeting this coming Thursday. I'll take an action item to share the analysis, like when we receive it asynchronously, and then we can meet next week on both the status of Snowplow, which should be migrated and operational by then, and move forward from there.
Okay. We'll have that be the plan of record then. I think that concludes the meeting today. Thank you all for your time. See you later. Bye.
Thanks, y'all.